Are the miracles of Jesus disproven? Well, since they've never been proven in the first place, that seems like a pretty irrelevant question. It's just moving the goalposts because that's what religion does. They can't help but assume that their beliefs are true, even when they've got absolutely nothing at all to back them up. It's the job of others to prove that they're wrong. They don't actually have to prove that they're right, but that's not actually how it works, is it? Today, we're going to return to John MacArthur, but this time it's a little different. Instead of him answering a question from the peanut gallery, this is part of a sermon, I'm assuming, but it shows just how unimpressive preachers like MacArthur actually are, because they just assume that they're right without ever taking the time to show that any of it is true. Because who cares about truth, right? Certainly not the religious. So let's get to our program already in progress.
So in verse 37 he says this, "But though he had performed so many signs before them, yet they were not believing in him."
I don't blame them. I probably wouldn't either. Because here's something that a lot of Christians that I run into fail at, one of many, many places, but they seem to read a whole lot into their own experiences just so they fit their religious beliefs without any evidence that any of those things are actually true. How many times have you seen this happen? Somebody will come up to you and just make some assertion. It can be something complex or something as stupid as, "Look at the trees." And of course, that comes with the obligatory, "Therefore God." Well, says who? That's just an empty claim presented without any evidence just because you really like the idea. But as soon as you point that out, what else can they really say? "Well, I showed you evidence, you just won't believe." But that's not evidence, that's wishful thinking. That's a claim that you made up in your head. You just want to arbitrarily attach "therefore God" to your claims when there is no objectively demonstrable link between what you said and any actual God. But you can't explain that to them, can you? Because they won't listen. Wonder why?
You say, well, that's just John's word. That's just John's word. No, it's not. Go back to chapter 11, verse 47. Let's go to the Supreme Court of Israel.
Who cares? Now, I'll let him get to that in a second, but we don't even know who wrote the book of John. It was written anonymously, and the name of John wasn't even attached to it until much later, when Papias just stapled names to the Gospels without any evidence whatsoever in the 2nd century. So we can't even say, well, it's just John's word, because you have no clue who the hell wrote it to begin with. It's just blind faith that it was somebody who was there with Jesus, but you can't prove that. Even if we were to assume that it was John, which is idiotic, but let's play make-believe here, where does that get them? Because they still don't have any way to tell how these things actually happened. Let's say they saw a miracle or something that they identified as a miracle. Does somebody living in that time have the rational capacity and the evidentiary support to work out the realities behind the event? Because I'd say hell no. Because in all honesty, they're doing the same thing that clueless Christians today are doing. Well, God did it. Says who? Because until you can demonstrate that God is real with objectively verifiable evidence, any claims of his involvement are entirely empty. But, go ahead. Get to your point.
The highest court in the land, the Sanhedrin. The chief priests and the Pharisees convene in this council called the Sanhedrin. And what do they say when they come together in the council? They were saying, "What are we doing? For this man is performing many signs."
Really? And how do you know that the Sanhedrin actually said that? I mean, you're not reading a first-hand account from any demonstrable Sanhedrin members, are you? Anybody can write anything that they want, especially when you can't even prove who is writing it. Hell, I could say that Elvis told me that my YouTube channel is the best channel of all time. Does that mean Elvis actually said it? Of course not. This is what happens when you want to believe a thing, but you can't prove a thing. It means absolutely nothing.
No one ever denied the miracles of Jesus. His enemies never denied one of his miracles, never tried to deny it.
Great. Trot his enemies out so we can ask them for ourselves. Where are their demonstrable first-hand accounts that explain what actually happened? Because you don't actually know any of that. We know that the early church actively tried to wipe out all things that they considered heretical. The only reason that we have some of the writings that we do are because some of the churches in Ireland especially refused to follow the dictates of the Pope. Now, I saw a quote once, and I really wish I could figure out where this was again because I've never been able to find it again, but one of the early popes went on record saying that they destroyed all heresies against the church. They were wrong, but that's what they said. When you've got lots and lots of political and social power and a ton of money on your side, you can try to get away with anything. That doesn't actually mean anything, though.
In fact, at the end of the Gospel of John, the final verse in chapter 21 says there were many other things which Jesus did, which if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written. Massive evidence, massive testimony confessed to not only by John, but by the Sanhedrin.
All claims made in a book of mythology with no corroboratory evidence of any kind. But of course, they can't accept that because they're starting with a vested interest in the veracity of the Bible. We're not. We want to see the actual evidence face to face. We don't want to see the claims because the claims don't actually matter. Unfortunately for them, they just don't have any actual evidence that they can present. They only have claims, and because of their blind faith, they have to accept that the claims represent actual truth, because otherwise, what do they actually have? Nothing. Nothing at all. And this is why we look for corroboratory evidence. We're not going to take anybody's word for it. Where are the records of the Sanhedrin where all of this is contained? We need multiple, demonstrably independent sources that all have the same information, hopefully from demonstrably direct, independent eyewitnesses. You got any of that? Of course you don't. This is why we don't take you seriously, because you've only got incredibly biased sources that you take completely on faith. And faith doesn't get you anywhere. You have to do a whole lot better than that.
The Supreme Court of Israel. They didn't even attempt to disprove what he did.
How do you know that? Better yet, how do you prove it? How do you know that any of this ever happened? Because if you're relying on John, that was written at a dead minimum 50 years after the supposed death of Jesus, how do you know that this is true? Most of the people who were around then were dead. These are just claims. But they have to believe the claims because, beefies. It's all they've got. MacArthur stands there on his stage telling stories to people who are just as gullible as he is, who aren't going to ask any of the difficult questions that really need to be asked. The questions I'm asking, who aren't going to expect any rational justification for their beliefs. They just believe it because it makes them happy. And that's why this nonsense goes on and on and on. Because they just don't care.
He healed the sick, expelled demons, controlled the winds and the sea, walked on water, turned water into wine, revealed to men their secret thoughts, raised the dead. And nobody ever denied any of it. They were open miracles. They were public miracles for everybody to see. Many of them done in the most public place of all, in and around the temple. And still they refused to believe.
Maybe none of it ever happened at all. Did you ever think of that? No, of course not. Your book says a thing, therefore it just has to be true, because you really want it to be true. You have to remember that for a very, very long time, the early church was tiny. It was a couple of little churches with a handful of members each. Nothing like what we picture as a church today. There were no holy books then. It was just traveling speakers telling stories, and those stories got passed on between believers in a giant game of telephone. By the time the gospel writers, whoever the hell they were, came around, they were just recounting the stories that have been told over and over and over again over the decades, and we're supposed to think that any of this was at all reliable. Try remembering verbatim a story that you heard 2 years ago, 2 months ago. Honestly, for most people, 2 days ago. You probably can't do it. How are we supposed to think that these gospel writers, again, whoever the hell they were, actually knew any of the stuff that had really happened? Because I don't think you can justify that at all. And that's exactly why we need the independent corroboration. But the Christians don't have that, and as we all know, they don't give a damn either, do they?
That's what I read you in John 15:24. They wouldn't have the level of sin they have if they had not seen what they saw and heard what they heard.
That assumes that sin is a thing in the first place, which, as we all know, it isn't. You can't sin unless there's a demonstrable deity to sin against. And good luck on producing that evidence, because the religious are going to need it. This is all blind confirmation bias, nothing more. There's no reason to take any of this seriously, at least not unless you are a brain-dead theist who desperately wants to believe. And why would anybody in their right mind want to be one of those?
They have hated me without cause. They refuse to believe. And here's the danger. When they would not believe, the judgment came, and they could not believe. You don't want to pass into that category.
Because then you'll be liable to the unjustified and unfounded threats in your big book of multiple choice that nobody ought to take seriously in the first place. Because that's really what Christianity is. It's a whole series of empty threats. Do what the church tells you, or God is gonna get ya. How do you know that? Because you say so? Because you have a really convenient reading of a book of mythology that you really like, and you really want everybody to believe you? Because you want everybody else's money? These people aren't working for free. But why should we take any of them seriously? It's never an intellectual question, it's always an emotional one. People don't want to burn for all eternity. But why would anybody in their right mind believe that that's going to be the case? Because a book says a thing? Or because some charismatic moron like John MacArthur says so from the pulpit of his very expensive church? It just proves how gullible and idiotic the religious actually are. They'll believe just about anything if it makes them happy. And that is really, really dumb.
When they would not believe, the judgment came, and they could not believe.
So, once again, God is a dick. Because we see that throughout the Bible. God hardens their hearts like he did to Pharaoh in the Old Testament. Because he's got a point to make, and he doesn't care about anybody's actual free will. Or, more likely, whoever wrote John, they were just trying to appeal to the existing Jewish population by making the Old Testament look like it predicted the New. Now, there were no testaments at the time, it was just the Jewish writings, but it's a whole lot easier for modern people to understand it if you put it in those terms, so we will. the ancient Hebrew scriptures said a lot of things, so the anonymous authors of the New Testament, they made use of them because it was more likely to be believed than just starting over from scratch. And the problem with people like MacArthur is that he believes it all blindly, because he wants to, because that's how he makes a living. I mean, that doesn't sound fishy at all, does it?
Follow the text. They were not believing in him, verse 37 says. They were not believing in him to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet, which he spoke, Lord, who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For this reason they could not believe.
God's still a dick. Now, I don't give a crap what it says in the Bible, because the Bible hasn't been independently validated. It's like somebody writing a New Testament of Harry Potter, then going back through the original 7 books and picking out passages that seem to support his new ideas. It means that the people who accepted the old stuff, they're probably more likely to accept the new stuff if they believe that it's a continuation. It's why things like Mormonism came about. You get a con man who knows that lots of people believe in the Bible, so, yeah, let's just make an addition and say God says it's true. Why? Because we say so. But that doesn't make any of it so, does it?
For Isaiah said again, He has blinded their eyes, and He hardened their heart, so that they would not see with their eyes and perceive with their heart and be converted, and I heal them. Verse 37 and 38 says they would not believe. Verse 38 and verse 39 says they therefore could not believe.
Thereafter, he tries to convert you with a bunch of text on the screen, so we're going to skip over all that. Because here's the real point to take away from this. MacArthur asks if the miracles of Jesus have been disproven. Well, why would we bother doing that when they've never been proven to begin with? You don't need to disprove something that no one has ever tried to demonstrate. All he has is a book of mythology and a bunch of empty claims. Oh, and a bunch of childish fifis, but that's normal. That's absolutely essential to what he's trying to do. Well, it is if you're a dumbass like John MacArthur and the pew puppets out front. They've never asked the basic questions to have a coherent understanding of the truth, because they don't care about the truth. They just want to believe. The problem is there's no good reason to believe, and what you want doesn't actually mean anything, at least not when it comes to reality. That's where most of these people fail. Fuck your fifis. Grow the hell up. But of course, they can't, because they're children living in adult bodies, and that explains religion for you. Children of all ages, and I think that has a whole different meaning now, buy into stupid things for overly emotional reasons because they wanna. But what you want doesn't matter. And until people can figure this crap out, nothing is ever going to improve. And that's kind of sad, isn't it?